In 1961, British Railways placed a locomotive with two naval-derived engines at the head of its most prestigious East Coast expresses. 22 Deltics were expected to do the work of a much larger steam fleet and run at 100 miles an hour as a matter of routine. That sounds like the beginning of a simple diesel triumph. Yet barely 20 years later, every Class 55 had left regular British rail service, displaced by another machine that was faster, cheaper to deploy, and easier to build into a complete passenger system. The obvious verdict is that the Deltic was an extravagant mechanical dead end. But that misses what the locomotive actually achieved, why its complexity was initially rational, and why replacement did not mean failure. The real question is not whether the Deltic engine was ingenious, it is whether 22 specialist locomotives changed British express travel enough to justify the maintenance organization hidden behind their famous roar. During the 1950s, the East Coast Main Line still depended on powerful steam Pacifics. They could run fast, but steam demanded coal, water, preparation, cleaning, turning, and intensive attention between journeys. British Railways wanted diesel traction that could reduce those burdens without surrendering the speed and prestige of services between London King's Cross, Yorkshire, Northeast England, and Edinburgh. The difficulty was fitting enough power into one locomotive without making it impossibly heavy. English Electric had already taken an extraordinary private gamble. Its 1955 demonstrator, officially DP1 but carrying the name Deltic, used two compact Napier power units and offered 3,300 horsepower in a single Coco locomotive. The prototype was not a production Class 55. It had a different body, an American-influenced nose treatment, cream and blue paint, and distinctive curved side decoration. Confusing DP1 with the later fleet erases the step from sales demonstrator to working railway tool. Inside DP1 was the idea that mattered. Each Napier Deltic engine arranged its cylinders in a triangle with a crankshaft at each corner and pairs of pistons moving towards one another inside each cylinder. There were no conventional cylinder heads. The opposed pistons uncovered inlet and exhaust ports as they moved, while the triangular layout allowed three cylinder banks to share three crankshafts. The geometry packed remarkable output into a compact engine. The design had naval ancestry, but the railway version was not simply a boat engine dropped between two cabs. English Electric integrated two D18-25 engines with generators, traction equipment, cooling, controls, and a 6-axle Coco running arrangement. That distinction matters because the Deltic locomotive was diesel-electric. Its engines drove generators, and electric traction motors turned the axles. The complex triangular power units produced electricity rather than mechanically driving the wheels through a gearbox. DP1 demonstrated on British routes from the mid-1950s. Its combination of power and relatively low weight offered British Railways a credible way to replace several dozen Pacifics with a fleet of only 22 production locomotives. The order became the English Electric Type 5, later Class 55. D9000 to D9021 emerged from Vulcan Foundry in 1961 and 1962, each with two engines nominally delivering 1,650 horsepower apiece. Production Deltics were unmistakable. They had long bodies, 6 axles in two 3-axle bogies, broad windscreens, rounded cab noses, and head coat arrangements that changed visually as the fleet aged. Their original British Railways green livery used pale window surrounds and comparatively small yellow warning panels in later green form. During the 1960s and 1970s, the fleet moved into corporate rail blue with full yellow ends and tops numbers beginning 55. The locomotives were also named, many after racehorses or British Army regiments. Those nameplates strengthened an identity inherited from the name Steam Pacifics, making the new diesel fleet feel like express motive power rather than anonymous machinery. Yet the revolution was not merely cosmetic. A Deltic could deliver high power without a tender, take fuel rather than coal and water, operate from either cab, and return to work without the servicing ritual demanded by steam. British Railways concentrated the class on the East Coast Main Line. Their task was not to wander everywhere, but to exploit a specialist fleet on repeated demanding diagrams where high power and rapid turnarounds produced the greatest benefit. That concentration also made the maintenance problem manageable. Doncaster Works developed the people, equipment, spares, and routines needed to support machinery unlike the more conventional medium-speed diesels spreading elsewhere. The crucial maintenance idea was exchange rather than prolonged repair inside the locomotive. A defective or life-expired power unit could be lifted out, replaced by an available unit, and overhauled separately in controlled workshop conditions. This did not make the engines simple. It made their complexity operationally containable. The railway was supporting a fleet of locomotives, a pool of removable power units, and a specialized repair system as one integrated machine. That system explains why judging the Class 55 only by the intricacy of a cutaway engine is misleading. Complexity inside one component could still produce reliable daily service if the organization around it anticipated failure, wear, and overhaul. On the road, two engines also provided a limited form of redundancy. A Deltic suffering trouble with one power unit did not automatically lose every source of power, although a single-engine locomotive could not maintain the full performance expected on a Premier Express. The sound became legendary because it revealed what the diagram demanded. Fans, blowers, 18-cylinder two-stroke engines, and high rotational speeds created a layered mechanical noise entirely unlike the slower pulse of most British diesels. But sound is memory, not the engineering verdict. The stronger evidence lies in what the fleet enabled: sustained high-speed operation, accelerated East Coast schedules, and the transfer of prestigious services from steam to diesel traction. The Science Museum Group describes the production fleet as providing Britain's first services regularly running at 100 miles an hour. That wording is more important than an isolated speed record. Regularity is what converts performance into transport. A locomotive may touch a dramatic speed once and achieve little. The Deltics' value came from repeating fast work with full passenger trains over a long main line while fitting into a working timetable. The Flying Scotsman was among the services associated with the class, but the Deltic story was larger than one named train. These locomotives carried the public image of the East Coast route through the 1960s and much of the 1970s. They did not eliminate infrastructure limits. Track, signaling, station work, pathing, coaching stock, and speed restrictions still governed the timetable. Locomotive power solved only one part of the journey. That becomes the key to their eventual displacement. The machine that replaced the Deltic was not merely a stronger locomotive. The InterCity 125 was a coordinated train set with a power car at each end and passenger vehicles designed for sustained high-speed service. Here, the familiar story changes direction. The Deltic had been the modern answer to steam's operating burden, but it remained a locomotive hauling conventional coaches. The high-speed train treated traction, braking, aerodynamics, passenger accommodation, and turnaround as one package. If you value locomotive history that tests the whole railway around the machine, like the video and subscribe. The comparison with the InterCity 125 now reveals why a successful locomotive could still become obsolete. The prototype high-speed train appeared in the early 1970s, and production sets began transforming British intercity services later in that decade. On the East Coast route, their arrival progressively removed the Deltics from the work that had justified their specialization. The replacement was economically powerful. A high-speed train used two production power cars based around the conventional Paxman Valenta engine, while offering a complete high-speed passenger formation rather than a locomotive for an inherited train. A Deltic could run at 100 miles an hour, but the high-speed train's normal maximum was 125. More importantly, the new sets were designed to exploit that speed as an operational system. The Deltics moved to secondary East Coast duties as the new trains took the principal diagrams. This was not an instant collapse caused by a newly discovered fatal defect. It was the planned erosion of the fleet's reason for existing. Specialist machinery becomes vulnerable when its premium task disappears. The training, spare engines, workshop knowledge, and overhaul effort remain expensive even as the number of suitable diagrams falls. Standardization now worked against the Class 55. In 1961, concentrating 22 exceptional locomotives on the East Coast was a rational way to obtain performance unavailable from ordinary diesel traction. By 1980, preserving that exception competed with a newer fleet strategy. Withdrawal began in 1980 and concluded at the start of January 1982. The oldest production machines were only about 20 years into their lives, a strikingly short span beside many steam classes and later British diesels. That short career fuels the accusation that the Deltic concept failed. Yet service life alone cannot decide the case. A machine bought to bridge one technological era may deliver its intended value before a better system removes its job. The class had helped eliminate steam from Britain's most demanding express route, carried premier traffic for years, and normalized regular 100-mile-an-hour diesel operation. Those are substantial outcomes for 22 locomotives. The counter-argument is equally real. Their two high-speed opposed piston engines demanded specialist support. They were not an economical universal locomotive, and British Rail did not reproduce their power unit concept across a large standard fleet. Their success, therefore, depended on concentration. Put the locomotives on the right route, provide Doncaster's support system, and exploit their power intensively. The bargain could work. Scatter them across ordinary duties, and their complexity would be much harder to justify. This is why calling them either perfect or disastrous produces the wrong lesson. The Deltic was an optimized answer to a narrow but important problem: the need to modernize East Coast Express traction before electrification or a purpose-built high-speed train was available. The preservation outcome offers another measure of their impact. 6 of the 22 production locomotives survived, an unusually strong result for a small diesel class whose remaining members stood in danger after withdrawal. The Deltic Preservation Society had formed in 1977, before the final withdrawals. By 1982, it had more than 1,500 members and purchased D9009 Elysodon and D9019 Royal Highland Fusilier directly from British Rail. The Society later acquired D9015 Tulyar. Other organizations secured D9000 Royal Scots Grey, D9002 the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, and D9016 Gordon Highlander, creating a preserved group that represents several identities and liveries. Preservation did not freeze them in 1982. Some returned to the national network, some worked heritage railways, and each accumulated a new history of overhauls, certification, failures, fundraising, and volunteer labor. That afterlife demonstrates both sides of the design. A working Deltic provides an experience no static diagram can reproduce. But keeping one working requires deep knowledge, suitable power units, expensive components, and a committed organization. Tulyar makes that cost visible. After withdrawal from heritage operation in 1997, it underwent a long restoration involving major body and mechanical work, substantial expenditure, and thousands of volunteer hours before its recent return to operation. The surviving prototype DP1 tells a different story. It belongs to the National Collection and retains the flamboyant form that sold the idea, while the preserved Class 55s show how British Railways turned that idea into a service fleet. Their visual differences must never be blurred. DP1 is the blue and cream demonstrator with prominent curved decoration. A production Deltic is the longer operational form numbered D9000 to D9021, later 55001 to 55022, according to its individual identity. There is one final irony. The Deltics displaced celebrated Steam Pacifics, then became objects of the same nostalgia once the high-speed train displaced them. Today, all 3 generations can be treated as heritage rather than modernity. That cycle can make every replacement feel like destruction. In engineering terms, however, replacement is often proof that the performance threshold has moved. The Deltic helped create expectations that made its own successor necessary. Its real achievement was not merely 3,300 horsepower or a triangular engine. It compressed steam-era express power into a locomotive that could be turned around quickly, supported by replaceable power units, and worked intensively on one strategic route. Its real limitation was the same specialization. When a complete 125-mile-an-hour train system arrived, British Rail no longer needed an expensive fleet devoted to making conventional expresses perform like the future. Which verdict is more convincing? That the Deltic was a successful bridge, an overcomplex dead end, or both at once? Choose one in the comments and subscribe for the next evidence-led case from British locomotive history. The Class 55 did not lose because it had failed to transform the East Coast Main Line. It lost because the transformation continued. 22 remarkable locomotives won the argument against steam, and then met a railway system designed to move beyond the locomotive itself.